Dust choked the porch. A boot kicked the door open. Blood dripped from the girl's arm onto the warped floorboards. The sheriff stood in the threshold, pistol drawn, spurs cutting through the silence. "Hand her over," he said. "Law says she's mine to question." Elias didn't move. He kept his rifle lowered. His thumb rested on a single brass cartridge in the chamber, the last one. He'd buried his brother for less than a stolen horse. He knew what the sheriff's cells did to captives. He knew what the desert would do to a wounded child left alone. "She stays," Elias said, voice flat as iron. The sheriff's hammer clicked back. Wind howled through the pines. One pull of a trigger would change everything. And the bullet in the barrel wasn't meant for vengeance. The hammer clicked back. Elias didn't blink. He kept the Winchester leveled just below the doorframe, sight picture steady on the sheriff's worn vest. Dust hung thick in the slanted afternoon light. The girl's breathing came in shallow, wet pulls against his shoulder. She weighed nothing, a hollow frame wrapped in torn buckskin. Blood soaked through the cloth where a bullet had grazed her ribs. He felt the heavy leather strap digging into her small fingers. She hadn't let go of it since he pulled her from the mud. He remembered the trough, the way she collapsed face first into the shallow water, dragging the satchel with her. He'd only managed to loosen her grip long enough to see the cover. Faded blue surveyor lines, official territorial stamps, not hunting maps or prayer bundles, property deeds. The exact boundaries the federal office had quietly erased 3 months ago. The sheriff wasn't hunting a runaway, he was chasing proof, the kind of paper that could strip a valley clean and leave men like Elias with nothing but dust and a noose. "Step aside, Thorne," the sheriff said. His voice carried the gravel of a man used to bending men to his will. He shifted his weight. Spurs ground into the warped pine boards. "You're harboring stolen property. That makes you an accomplice." Outside, a heavy boot struck the bottom step. Deputy Miller's shadow stretched across the floorboards. 2 more men waited near the hitching post. Horses snorted, shifting against leather reins. The dry wind carried the metallic scent of saddle-oiled steel. Crows circled low over the barn roof, silent as grave. The town had already sent word. If the sheriff rode back empty-handed, the militia would ride at dawn. They wouldn't ask questions. Elias lowered the rifle an inch, just enough to fill his lungs. His calloused thumb rested against the cold brass of the single-loaded round. He'd watched his brother hang over a disputed horse. He knew the weight of a gavel in a courthouse that only served men with silver pocket watches. Hand her over and his land stayed safe. Keep her and the law would burn his homestead, ruin his name, and leave him bleeding in the same dirt he'd bled to clear. The girl stirred. Her fevered lips parted. A single Apache word slipped out. Then her dark eyes locked onto his, not pleading, waiting. "Law's clear," the sheriff said, stepping into the shadowed room. The floorboards groaned under his heavy tread. "Give her up, or I drag her out myself." Elias shifted his stance. His heel found the heavy iron deadbolt. The wood felt solid under his boot. He looked down at the ledger resting against the girl's chest, looked up at the barrel pointed at his ribs. Safety or conscience, silence or ruin, the answer didn't come easy. He pressed his weight back. The iron slid home with a sharp, final click. "Try the door, Sheriff," he said, "and see how far your law reaches today." The iron bolt held. The wood groaned under the sheriff's weight, but the frame didn't give. Outside, the wind shifted. Dust swirled across the porch boards in thin, gray ribbons. The girl's breathing remained shallow, wet. Her fingers tightened against the leather strap of the satchel as if her life depended on the paper beneath it. Elias kept the rifle steady. His sight picture didn't waver. He didn't blink. He listened to the heavy thud of boots on the steps, the jingle of spurs, the low murmur of men who had ridden hard to witness a breaking point. The sheriff didn't step back. He pressed his shoulder against the door. The wood cracked. A splinter dropped to the floor. "You're a fool, Thorn," he said, voice low, measured. "You think you're protecting a child. You're signing a death warrant for yourself and anyone who stands beside you." Elias didn't answer. He shifted his weight. His boots scraped the floorboards. He felt the weight of the Winchester in his hands, familiar, heavy, cold. He knew the exact pressure it took to squeeze the trigger. He knew the exact distance to the sheriff's chest. He also knew what would happen if he pulled it. The town would burn him out. The territorial judges would brand him a murderer. The ledger would vanish. The valley would be carved up by men who never worked the dirt. He'd seen it before. He'd carried his brother's coffin over hard-packed earth 3 winters ago. The wood had been rough, unplaned, paid for with a hanging rope and a stolen mare. He wouldn't repeat it. More boots approached. Deputy Miller stepped onto the porch first. His hat was pulled low. His hands rested near his holster but didn't draw. Behind him came 3 townsmen, sealers from the general store, Old Man Corrigan, who ran the livery, and Harlan, who held the mortgage on Elias' south pasture. They didn't speak at first. They stood in the doorway's shadow, watching the standoff, watching the blood dry on the warped boards, watching the girl's chest rise and fall in ragged pulls. "Elias," Sealers said finally. His voice carried the rough edge of a man who had seen too many winters and not enough mercy. "Step out of the way. Let the sheriff take her. You don't owe this territory your ruin. You've worked too long to lose it over a stray." Harlan shifted his weight. Leather creaked. "The marshal rides tomorrow. If you're holding a fugitive, they'll seize the deed. They'll burn the barn. They'll hang you from the cottonwood out back. Is that the legacy you want? A rope and an empty house?" Elias' jaw tightened. He felt the callus on his trigger finger press against the cold metal guard. He didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on the threshold, on the sheriff's worn boots, on the dust settling around them. He remembered the first time he broke ground on this land, the sweat, the blisters, the way the soil smelled after the first rain. He remembered burying his brother under a sky just as gray as this one. He remembered the silence after the drop. The way the earth didn't care about justice, the way men made their own. He lowered the rifle an inch, just enough to ease the strain in his shoulders. He exhaled, slow, measured. The girl's hand slipped slightly on the leather strap. Blood smeared across her knuckles. She didn't wake. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Her breathing was enough. The satchel was enough. "Lord, don't bleed," Elias said, voice flat, quiet. "I won't either." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He didn't smile. He didn't curse. He just nodded once. A slow, deliberate motion. "You'll regret it," he said. "When the posse rides back, they won't knock. They'll burn the door off. They'll drag you out. They'll leave the child to the sun. And when they hang you, they'll do it quietly. No trial, no jury, just rope and dirt." He stepped back. Spurs scraped the wood. He turned to the townsmen. "Mount up," he said. "Tell the marshal we have an outlaw on the ridge. Tell him to bring extra rope. Tell him to bring a wagon for the girl when she's dead." They didn't argue. They turned. Boots hit the steps. Leather groaned. Saddles creaked. Horses snorted and shifted. The sound faded down the trail. Dust rose in thick clouds. The wind carried it away. Silence returned, heavy, thick, pressing down on the porch like a physical weight. Elias didn't move until the last hoofbeat vanished into the scrub. Only then did he step back. He slid the Winchester into the corner. He knelt beside the girl. Her skin was hot, dry. Her pulse fluttered against his fingers like a trapped bird. He checked the wound again. The bullet had grazed her ribs, torn the skin, left a trail of dried blood down her side. He needed clean water, clean cloth. Time, he didn't have much of any of it. He stood, walked to the wash basin, poured water into a tin cup, dipped a torn strip of linen, wringed it out. The cloth felt rough against his calloused hands. He knelt again, pressed the damp fabric to her wound. She flinched. A soft sound escaped her throat. Her eyes opened for a fraction of a second, dark, clear, focused, then closed. Her breathing steadied, just slightly. He set the cup aside. Walked to the kitchen, opened the cabinet, pulled out the ammunition tin. It was light, too light. He opened the lid. Empty slots stared back at him, brass shells scattered in the bottom, two left. He picked one up, rolled it between his thumb and forefinger, felt the weight, felt the cold metal, felt the promise inside it. He picked up the second, placed it in the Winchester's chamber, closed the bolt. The click echoed through the quiet house, final, absolute. He walked to the window, looked out. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretched across the yard, the cottonwood leaves trembled, the wind carried the scent of dry earth and distant smoke. He knew what was coming. He knew the posse would ride at dawn. He knew the sheriff wouldn't wait for the marshal. He knew the town had already chosen its side. He knew he couldn't wait behind a locked door. Waiting meant surrender. Waiting meant the ledger vanished. Waiting meant the girl died in a cell or bled out in the dirt. He had to move. He had to take the burden to the ground where it belonged. He walked to the back room. Pulled a heavy canvas coat from the peg, checked the lining, empty. He strapped on his belt, adjusted the buckle. The leather felt worn, familiar. He grabbed a canteen, filled it at the pump, tied it to his saddle, checked the girth, checked the stirrups. Everything held, everything worked. He didn't need much, just water, just the rifle, just the truth. He stepped back onto the porch, looked down at the girl. She slept, or passed out. He couldn't tell. He knelt one last time. Pressed his hand lightly against her shoulder, felt the fragile bone beneath the torn buckskin. "You stay alive," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I'll handle the rest." He stood, walked to the hitching post, mounted. The horse shifted under his weight, snorted, blew dust from its nostrils. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew what he was leaving behind. He knew what he was riding into. He knew the cost. He accepted it. He pulled the reins, turned toward the canyon passes. The first hoofbeat cracked against the dry trail. The second followed. Then the third. The rhythm built, steady, unbreaking. The dust rose behind him. The sun sank lower. The shadows lengthened. The ride had begun. The trail narrowed quickly. Cottonwoods gave way to juniper and scrub pine. The soil grew harder, rockier. The horse's hooves slipped on loose shale. Elias kept his weight centered, his hands light on the reins. He didn't push the animal. He let it find its footing. He watched the ridge lines, watched for movement, watched for shadows that didn't belong to trees. The wind carried the scent of sage and dried grass. It carried something else too, smoke, distant, faint, not campfire smoke, signal smoke or warning smoke. He didn't know. He kept riding. The canyon walls rose higher, steeper. The sky narrowed to a thin strip of pale blue. The air grew cooler. The light shifted. Long shadows stretched across the trail. He passed a dried creek bed. Rocks cracked under the horse's weight. He kept his eyes forward, his shoulders relaxed, his breathing even. He didn't flinch when the first shot echoed through the gorge. It cracked off the canyon wall, spat dirt 3 feet to his left. No warning, no voice, just the sharp report of a rifle and the echo bouncing off stone. The horse, startled, sidestepped. Elias tightened his grip, calmed it with a low murmur. He didn't reach for his weapon, he didn't look up. He kept riding. He knew what the shot meant. It meant he was seen, it meant he was tracked, it meant the path ahead was controlled. Another shot, closer. It struck a rock near the trail edge. Chipped stone flew into the air, dust plumed, the horse shied again. Elias pressed his heels gently, kept the pace steady. He didn't run. Running meant panic. Running meant guilt. Running meant he was hiding something. He was. He was walking into it. Open hands, open eyes, open conscience. He passed a bend in the trail. The walls closed tighter. The light dimmed. The air felt heavy. He saw them then, silhouettes on the ridge, still as statues, dark against the fading sky, not moving, not speaking, just watching, waiting, judging. He counted 4. Maybe 5, hard to tell in the low light. They didn't raise their rifles, they didn't signal, they just held their positions, letting him pass through the narrowest point, letting him know he was surrounded, letting him know there was no turning back. The trail opened slightly, the canyon floor widened, the soil turned to packed dirt. He kept riding, the horse's breathing grew heavier, sweat darkened its neck. He checked the canteen, still half full. He checked the sky, the sun was nearly gone. Twilight would hit soon, darkness would follow. He didn't want to be in the pass when it fell. He didn't want to negotiate in the dark. He pushed slightly harder, not fast, just steady, just relentless. Another warning shot. This one cracked directly overhead. A branch split, leaves rained down. The horse bolted forward. Elias leaned back, held the reins firm. Let the animal find its balance. He didn't curse, he didn't swear, he just breathed. In, out, slow, measured. He knew the shooters weren't trying to kill him, not yet. They were testing him, testing his nerve, testing his resolve, testing whether he would break and run or hold his ground and face them. He held his ground. He reached a fork in the trail. Left led deeper into the pass. Right curved back toward the homestead. The retreat path, the safe path, the path that would keep his land intact and his neck clear. He didn't hesitate. He pulled left. The horse followed. The trail narrowed again. The walls rose higher. The light faded faster. Shadows swallowed the path. He kept riding. Every hoofbeat echoed. Every breath grew heavier. Every mile tightened the noose. He passed a rock formation shaped like a broken jaw. Teeth of stone jutted from the cliff face. Beneath it, the trail split into 2 narrow ruts. He took the upper one. The ground grew steeper. Loose gravel shifted under the hooves. He dismounted, led the horse by the reins, walked. The boots crunched on stone. The wind howled through the narrow pass. The temperature dropped. He pulled his coat tighter, checked the rifle in the scabbard, left it. Unloaded the chamber, let the brass cartridge fall into his palm. He rolled it between his fingers, felt the weight, felt the cold, felt the promise. He slipped it into his vest pocket, walked on, empty-handed, unarmed, open, the path leveled out, a flat stretch of hard-packed earth. The canyon opened into a wide basin. Sagebrush dotted the ground, rocks jutted from the soil. The sky above was deep purple. Twilight had fallen. The first stars appeared, faint, distant. Watching, he stopped, let the horse rest, tied the reins to a low branch, stepped away, turned, faced the ridge lines, faced the shadows, faced the men who controlled the ground. He stood still, hands at his sides, shoulders relaxed, eyes forward. He didn't speak, he didn't call out, he just waited. Let them see him, let them measure him, let them decide whether he was threat or guest. The wind carried the scent of pine and dry earth. It carried the faint sound of shifting leather, of quiet breath. of boots on stone. They were close, closer than before. He could feel them, not just in the air. In the ground, in the silence, a figure stepped from the shadows, tall, lean, cloaked in a heavy wool blanket, a rifle slung across his back, empty hands at his sides, dark hair, sharp features, eyes that missed nothing. He walked forward, slow, deliberate, each step measured, each breath quiet. He stopped 10 feet away, looked at Elias, looked at his empty hands, looked at his face, looked at the dirt on his boots, looked at the sky above. Elias didn't move, he didn't blink. He held the man's gaze, let the silence stretch, let it weigh, let it settle. He knew what came next. He knew the words that would be spoken. He knew the questions that would be asked. He knew the answers that would matter. He was ready. He wasn't there to fight. He wasn't there to hide. He was there to answer. To step into the fire, to take the burden, to prove that some lines aren't drawn in law, they're drawn in blood and in choice. The man spoke, voice low, rough, grounded, not English, Apache. Elias didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It wasn't hostile, it wasn't welcoming, it was testing, measuring, weighing. He nodded once. Slow, clear, he stepped forward, closed the distance, stopped 3 feet away. He didn't reach out, he didn't bow, he just stood, present. Unbroken, waiting. The man studied him, long, hard. Then he turned, looked up at the ridge, raised a single hand, fingers spread, then closed, a signal. Shadows shifted, figures moved, boots descended the slope. Quiet, controlled, purposeful. They didn't surround him, they didn't aim weapons. They just stood at the edges of the basin, watching, waiting, letting him feel the weight of the ground, letting him feel the truth of the moment. He wasn't a prisoner, he wasn't a guest, he was a test. And the test had only just begun. He didn't flinch, he didn't step back, he held his ground, felt the cold earth through his boots, felt the wind against his face, felt the quiet pulse of the basin. He knew what he had left behind, he knew what he was standing in. He knew what was coming next. The ledger, the girl, the sheriff, the law, the land, it all hung in the space between breaths, between heartbeats, between the man standing before him and the truth he carried. He didn't speak, he didn't need to, his presence was enough, his choice was enough. The next move wasn't his, it was theirs. And he would face it, whatever it was, however it came. He had walked into the fire, he would stand in it, he would endure it, he would answer it. The man in the wool blanket stepped closer, reached into his coat, pulled out a folded piece of buckskin, unfolded it slowly, let it catch the fading light, symbols drawn in charcoal, lines, marks, boundaries, deeds, the same marks from the satchel, the same truth, the same burden. He held it out, didn't drop it, didn't push it, just offered it. Open palm, steady hand, waiting for the choice, waiting for the man, waiting for the moment that would define everything. Elias looked at the buckskin, looked at the lines, looked at the man, looked at the ridge, looked at the sky. He didn't reach out, not yet. He let the weight of it settle. Let the truth of it press down. Let the cost of it sink in. He knew what taking it meant. He knew what refusing it meant. He knew the path forward. It wasn't easy, it wasn't safe, it wasn't simple, it was the only one left. He stepped forward, raised his hand, open, empty, steady, ready to take it, ready to carry it, ready to face what came next. The basin held its breath, the wind stilled, the shadows waited, the moment arrived, and Elias Thorne reached into. If you ride with me this far, you know the hard part isn't reaching for the truth. It's carrying it when the weight finally settles. That buckskin isn't just paper, it's a mirror. And the war leader is watching to see if Elias will flinch when the ground shifts beneath him. If this story has you locked in, hit that like button now and subscribe if you haven't. Because the real test begins the moment his fingers touch that leather and it won't end with words. The buckskin trembled in the fading light. Charcoal lines marked boundaries that had shifted a dozen times since the territorial surveyors first rode through. Names were crossed out. New signatures were stamped in black ink. Some looked official, others looked forged. The war leader held it steady. His fingers were rough, scarred, stained with dirt and old soot. He didn't drop it. He didn't push it forward. He just held it out, waiting, watching, letting the silence stretch until it felt heavy enough to break bone. Elias didn't reach for it, not yet. He kept his hands at his sides, palms open, fingers relaxed. He let the wind carry the scent of pine resin and dry earth. He let the cold settle into his boots. He let the moment weigh him down. He knew what the buckskin represented. He knew what it meant to touch it. It wasn't just paper, it wasn't just ink. It was a line in the dirt, a choice, a burden. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. His boots crunched on hard-packed soil. Each step echoed. Each breath grew heavier. He stopped 3 feet from the man, looked at the map, looked at the hands holding it, looked at the eyes behind it, dark, unblinking, measuring. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He nodded once, a sharp, clear motion. Then he raised his right hand, open, empty, steady. He reached out, took the edge of the buckskin, felt the rough texture, felt the weight of it, felt the truth pressed into the fibers. He folded it carefully, slipped it into his coat against his chest, where the heart beat slow, where the weight settled deep. He didn't smile, he didn't sigh, he just stood. Present, unbroken, ready. The war leader lowered his hand, slow, controlled. He stepped back, looked up at the ridge, raised 2 fingers, curled them down, a signal. Shadows shifted, figures moved, leather creaked, bows unstrung with quiet snaps, rifles shifted on shoulders. The circle didn't break. It just loosened, just enough to breathe, just enough to let the tension bleed out into the cooling air. Elias kept his hands visible. He didn't reach for his belt. He didn't adjust his coat. He just waited. Let the test begin. The leader spoke, voice low, rough, grounded in a cadence that didn't match the territorial tongue. Words Elias didn't know, but the tone cut through the distance. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't welcoming. It was probing, sharp, measuring. A warrior asking a question that didn't need translation. Why step into the fire? Why protect what the law calls stolen? Why risk your land for a child who carries no name to your bloodline? Why walk unarmed into a basin surrounded by men who have watched your kind take everything and leave nothing but ash? Elias didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He met the gaze, let the silence stretch. Then he spoke, voice quiet, flat, carrying the weight of a man who had spent years learning that words matter more when they're scarce. She bled out at my trough, he said. I didn't ask what tribe, I didn't ask what war, I asked if she needed water. She did, I gave it, that's all. The leader's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, boots silent on the dirt. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. You're kind, he said, switching to broken English, heavy with gravel and old grief, brings water with one hand, takes the well with the other. You speak of thirst, you dig the ditch, you fence the spring, you hang men who cross the line. Where is your honor in that? Elias' hands stayed at his sides. His shoulders didn't tense. His breathing stayed even. He felt the cold brass of his rifle in the scabbard at his back. Unloaded, useless as a weapon, useful as a symbol. He'd left it there on purpose. He knew what it meant. He knew what it cost. I don't fence the spring, he said. I don't hang men who cross it. I bury the dead they leave behind. I patch the fences they break. I ride out when the law rides in, and I don't ask for payment. The leader studied him, eyes narrow, sharp, searching for the lie, searching for the tremor in the voice, searching for the greed masked as virtue. He circled him, slow, deliberate, each step measured, each breath quiet. Elias didn't turn with him. He kept his eyes forward. Let the man walk around him. Let the warriors watch. Let the wind carry the truth between them. He felt the weight of years pressing down. He felt the ghosts of broken treaties. He felt the blood in the soil. He didn't try to outrun it. He stood in it. He owned it. The leader stopped. Behind him, close enough to hear the rustle of wool against leather, close enough to smell the sweat and old sage, he spoke again, voice lower now, heavier. Your brother hangs from the cottonwood 3 miles east. I saw the rope marks when I rode through the valley. I saw the town men drink after it was done. I heard them laugh. You did nothing. Elia's throat tightened. The memory hit like a hammer to the ribs, the rough wood of the gallows, the snap of the rope, the way his brother's boots kicked at the air before stillness took over. The way the town sheriff had looked away, the way the judge had called it justice. He didn't let the pain show, he didn't let his voice crack, he just breathed. In, out, slow. I did what I could, he said. I dug the hole, I filled it. I kept my hands off the trigger. I knew pulling it would just make more grave. It wouldn't bring him back. The leader stepped around him, back to face him, eyes locked. So you choose to do nothing while the law steals, while the children bleed, while the land burns. Elias shook his head just once. I don't choose nothing. I choose not to feed the fire. I choose to stand between the blade and the throat. I choose to keep the truth in my coat. And I choose to walk into your basin unarmed. That's not nothing. That's everything I have left. Silence fell, heavy, thick, pressing down on the basin like a physical weight. The warriors didn't shift. The bows stayed loose. The rifles stayed low. The leader didn't blink. He studied Elias' face, the lines around his eyes, the scar running along his jaw, the dirt on his boots, the way his hands rested. Open, empty, steady. He was looking for fear. He was looking for pride. He was looking for the crack that let the lie out. He didn't find it. He found something else. Something quiet. Something hard, something earned. He reached into his coat, pulled out a small iron token, roughly forged, shaped like a broken arrow. He placed it on the ground between them. Pick it up, he said, voice low, clear. Hold it, feel it. It means nothing to your law. It means everything to ours. It means a man who walks into fire without burning is worth listening to. It means a man who protects the weak without asking for coin is worth trusting. But trust is not given, it is tested, and it breaks if the ground shifts. Elias looked at the iron, looked at the man, looked at the ridge. He didn't hesitate, he knelt, picked it up, felt the cold metal, felt the rough edges, felt the weight of it in his palm. He closed his fingers around it, stood, slipped it into his vest, next to the brass cartridge, next to the ledger, 3 weights, 3 choices, 3 burdens. He nodded. I'll carry it, he said. I won't drop it. The leader's shoulders relaxed, just slightly, just enough to signal a shift. He raised his hand again, fingers spread, then closed. The circle widened. Warriors stepped back, bows lowered completely, rifles shifted to resting positions. The tension didn't vanish. It transformed from threat to assessment, from suspicion to cautious acknowledgement. It wasn't friendship, it wasn't alliance, it was respect. Hard-won, fragile, real. Elias didn't smile, he didn't sigh, he just stood. Let the moment settle. Let the weight of it sink into his bones. He knew what it meant. He knew what it cost. He knew the ground could still shift. He knew the test wasn't over. It had just begun. He turned slightly, looked toward the eastern ridge. The sky was deep purple now. Stars blinked through the thinning light. The wind carried a new scent, not pine, not sage, dust, gunpowder, horses, lots of them. The war leader heard it too. His head turned. Eyes narrowed, hand drifted to the rifle on his back, not drawing, just resting, ready. Elias felt it in the ground, a low tremor, faint, growing, steady, the sound of a posse riding hard, riding with purpose, riding with the sheriff's warrant and the town's rage. He knew they wouldn't stop at the canyon mouth. He knew they'd follow the dust. He knew they'd come armed. He knew they'd expect a fight. He knew they'd expect him to run. The leader spoke, voice sharp, urgent. They come, many, fast. They will not knock. They will burn. They will take. They will leave you hanging beside your brothers. Elias didn't look away. He kept his eyes on the ridge, felt the iron in his pocket, felt the ledger against his chest, felt the cold brass in his rifle's scabbard. "I know," he said, voice flat. Quiet, unshaken. "Let them come, I'll be here. I won't run, I won't shoot first. I won't break the ground I just stepped on." The leader studied him one last time, nodded, once, sharp, final. "Then we do not leave you," he said, "but we do not fight for you, we fight with you, or we watch you fall. Choose your ground, white man, choose it now. The dust is rising, the horns are calling, the law does not wait for honor." Elias stepped forward, looked at the basin, looked at the ridge, looked at the men who had circled him, men who had tested him, men who had weighed his truth against years of betrayal and found it heavy enough to hold. He didn't have time, he didn't have backup, he didn't have a plan, he had a choice, and he made it. "I stand here," he said, "with you or without you. I don't move, I don't hide, I hold the line. Let them see what justice looks like when it doesn't wear a badge." Leader didn't argue, he didn't smile, he just turned, raised his arm, fingers pointing west, then east. A command, warriors moved, silent, fast, ordered. They didn't scatter, they didn't panic. They took positions, behind rocks, along the ridge in the shadows, bows unstrung, arrows nocked, rifles loaded but not raised. They weren't preparing for a slaughter. They were preparing for a stand. Elias watched them, felt the shift in the air, felt the weight of the moment, felt the truth pressing down. He wasn't alone anymore, but he wasn't safe. He was exactly where he needed to be. The dust plume appeared first, thin, gray, rising against the fading sky, then the horns. Two sharp blasts, echoing through the gorge, then the hoofbeats, steady, relentless, growing louder. The posse was closing the gap, fast, hard, unforgiving. Elias stood his ground, hands empty, shoulders squared, breath steady. He didn't reach for his weapon, he didn't look for an escape, he just waited. Let the sound build, let the tension coil, let the moment arrive. The war leader stepped beside him, close, shoulder nearly touching, voice low, barely audible over the wind. "Your last bullet," he said, "is it for them?" Elias didn't blink, didn't look away. "No," he said, "it's for the truth. When the time comes, I'll use it, not to kill, to speak." The leader didn't answer, he just nodded, looked up at the ridge, watched the dust grow, watched the shadows lengthen. Watched the line between law and justice blur into dust and blood. The first rider crested the eastern slope, silhouetted against the dying light. Hat pulled low, rifle across his saddle, then another, and another, and another, 12, maybe more, the sheriff at the front, the townsmen behind, the marshal trailing with a wagon and extra rope. They didn't slow, they didn't call out. They just rode, fast, hard, straight toward the basin, straight toward the line. Elias didn't move. He felt the iron in his pocket, felt the ledger against his chest, felt the quiet pulse of the ground beneath his boots. He knew what was coming. He knew the cost. He accepted it. He stood still. Let the wind howl. Let the dust rise. Let the moment break. And when the first horn blasted again, he didn't flinch. He just waited, ready, unbroken, holding the line, whatever came next. However it ended, he would face it, not with vengeance, not with fear, with the quiet, heavy truth of a man who had finally chosen to stand. The dust plume crested the ridge like a slow-moving storm. It rolled over the limestone edge, thick and choking, catching the copper light of the sinking sun. Hoofbeats followed, steady, heavy, relentless. The sound vibrated through the hard-packed earth, traveling up through boot soles into bone, into chest. 12 riders, maybe more, they spread across the basin mouth in a wide, controlled arc. Dust settled on wool coats, on polished brass buttons, on leather rifle scabbards. On the coiled hemp ropes tied to saddle horns, the sheriff rode at the center, hat pulled low, jaw set, hand resting near his holster but not drawing. Behind him came the townsmen, sealers, Harlan, Corrigan, men who had watched the valley shift for years, men who had learned to bend toward power. Behind them rode the federal marshal, gray coat, quiet posture, eyes that measured rather than judged. He carried no rope. He carried a ledger of his own, but he kept it closed. He waited, he watched, he let the law speak first. Elias didn't move. He stood at the center of the basin, boots planted, shoulders squared, hands resting at his sides. The wind died, the sagebrush stilled. The air turned heavy, thick with the scent of dry earth, horse sweat, and old gun oil. The Apache riders held the high ground, silhouetted against the fading sky, motionless, bows unstrung but within reach, rifles resting on knees, eyes fixed on the riders below, no tension in their posture, just readiness, the kind that comes from knowing the ground, from knowing the weight of a standoff, from knowing that violence is a language best spoken only when every other word has failed. Elias felt them behind him, not as allies, not as guards, as witnesses, as men who had tested him, as men who had weighed his truth and found it heavy enough to hold. He didn't turn to look, he didn't need to. Their presence was an anchor, a line drawn in the dirt, a boundary he had chosen to defend. The sheriff dismounted first. Boots hit the hard soil, dust puffed around his heels. He adjusted his belt, let his hand rest lightly on the worn walnut grip of his Colt. He didn't draw, he didn't need to. The threat was in the posture, in the stillness, in the way the townsmen shifted in their saddles, in the way the ropes swayed against leather. He walked forward, slow, deliberate, each step measured, each breath visible in the cooling air. He stopped 20 feet away, looked at Elias, looked at his empty hands, looked at the dust on his coat, looked at the ridge, looked at the sky. Then he spoke, voice low, carrying, grounded in the gravel of a man who had spent years bending territory to his will. "You've had your say, Thorne," he said. "Now the law takes the floor. You're holding a fugitive. You're withholding territorial property. You're standing between a warrant and the men sworn to enforce it. Step aside, hand over the ledger, give us the girl, or I cut you down where you stand and let the crows finish what the desert started." Elias didn't blink, he didn't shift his weight. He let the words hang in the air, let them settle, let them press down. He felt the cold brass of the revolver in his holster, felt the familiar curve of the grip, felt the weight of the single silver cartridge waiting in the cylinder. He had carried it for years, kept it clean, kept it oiled, kept it separate from the rest. It wasn't for hunting, it wasn't for show. It was for the moment when everything else ran out, the moment when silence became heavier than speech. The moment when a choice had to be made without the luxury of a second chance. His thumb traced the edge of the trigger guard, calloused skin against cold steel. He remembered the gallows 3 miles east, the rough hemp, the snap of wood, the way his brother's boots had kicked at empty air before stillness took over. He remembered the townsmen drinking afterward, laughing, calling it justice, calling it order. He remembered the way the dirt had felt under his boots when he filled the grave. Cold, hard, unforgiving. He had sworn then that he wouldn't feed the fire, that he wouldn't become the thing that hung his brother, that he would stand in the space between the blade and the throat, even if it cost him everything, even if it left him alone. Harlan shifted in his saddle. Leather creaked. "Don't be a fool, Elias," he called out, voice tight, urgent. "You think you're making a point. You're digging your own hole. The marshal will back the warrant. The judge will sign the order. They'll burn the house. They'll take the pasture. They'll hang you from the cottonwood. Is that what you want? To die for a child who isn't yours, for paper that don't belong to you? Step aside. Live to work another season." Sealers leaned forward, hat brim shadowed his eyes. "We ain't here for blood, we're here for order. Hand it over, let the law handle it. You've bled enough for this valley, don't bleed more." Elias didn't answer, he didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on the sheriff, on the worn leather of his vest, on the dirt ground into the seams, on the way his thumb rested near his holster, on the tension in his jaw. He knew what they wanted. They wanted a show, they wanted a shootout, they wanted the rancher to draw, they wanted the Apache to fire. They wanted the valley to burn so the law could rebuild it in their image. They wanted the narrative to be simple: good men, bad men, clear lines, clean endings. They wanted the silver bullet to fly. They wanted it to strike. They wanted the story to end in smoke and rope and silence. They didn't want truth. They wanted order. They wanted control. They wanted the ground to stay still. The war leader stepped down from the ridge. Slow, controlled, boots silent on the stone. He stopped 10 feet behind Elias, didn't speak, didn't move, just stood, a shadow against the dying light, a reminder of what stood on the other side of the line, of what had already been tested, of what had already been weighed. Elias felt the iron token in his pocket, felt its rough edges, felt its cold weight, felt the promise it carried. He didn't reach for it, he didn't need to. It was already there, already part of him, already part of the ground he stood on. The sheriff took another step, closer. 15 feet now, 10. His voice dropped, lower, heavier, grounded in the finality of a man who had stopped asking and started commanding. "Last chance, Thorn, drop the ledger, walk away. Let us handle the rest, or I draw and I don't miss." The air tightened, breath held, heartbeats synced with the slow shift of horse weight. Dust settled in thin layers, light faded faster. The sun dipped below the limestone ridge. Copper turned to bruised purple. Shadows stretched long and sharp across the basin. The townsmen shifted. Rifles lifted slightly. Barrels caught the fading light. Apache fingers rested on bow strings. Arrows pointed, not drawn, not loosed, just ready, waiting, testing. The moment fractured, split into seconds, into breaths, into the space between a command and an answer. Elias' hand moved, slow, deliberate, unhurried. He reached to his belt, felt the worn leather of the holster, felt the familiar curve of the grip. His fingers closed around the wood. Cold, solid, real. He drew the revolver, weight settled in his palm, balanced, familiar, deadly. He didn't aim at the sheriff, didn't aim at the townsmen, didn't aim at the ridge. He raised it, straight up, barrel catching the last sliver of dying light. Smoke hadn't formed yet, just steel, just silence. Just the weight of a choice made in the dark before it was born into sound. The sheriff flinched, stepped back, hand flew to his holster, fingers wrapped around his own grip. Thumb pulled back the hammer, click, loud, sharp, final, townsmen braced, horses snorted, shifted against reins. Rifles settled into shooting positions, Apache bows creaked, fingers tightened, arrows lifted. The basin held its breath, dust hung still, wind died completely. The sky turned dark purple, first stars blinked through the thinning veil. Cold air pressed down, heavy, absolute, unforgiving. Elias didn't hesitate, he squeezed. The crack was deafening. It shattered the silence, echoed off the canyon walls, bounced across the basin, rung in ears, in bones, in teeth. Smoke curled from the barrel, thick, gray. Heavy, it drifted into the cooling air, spread thin, dissolved into the twilight. The sound faded, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat slowing, like a breath releasing, like a weight finally setting down. No shots returned, no arrows loosed, no horses bolted, just the echo dying. Just the smoke thinning, just the heavy silence settling over 12 men, over a sheriff, over a marshal, over a ridge of warriors, over a rancher who had chosen not to fire at flesh. Elias lowered the revolver, spun the cylinder, empty. The silver casing dropped into the dust. Small, bright, final. He didn't look at it. He didn't need to. He knew what it meant. He knew what it cost. He holstered the empty gun, let his hand rest at his side. Open, empty, steady. He took a step forward. Boots crunched on hard soil. Dust puffed around his heels. He walked past the sheriff, close enough to smell whiskey, old sweat, gun oil, fear. The sheriff didn't move, hand still on his holster, eyes wide, confused, angry, afraid, breath shallow, chest tight. He didn't draw, he didn't speak, he just watched. Watched the man walk, watched the smoke clear, watched the choice unfold. Elias kept walking, shoulders straight, posture unbroken. He reached the federal marshal, stopped, looked at him, looked at the gray coat, looked at the quiet eyes, looked at the hands resting on the saddle horn. He reached into his coat, pulled out the buckskin-wrapped ledger, felt the rough texture, felt the weight of the paper, felt the truth pressed into the fibers. He held it out, open hand, steady arm, unshaking. "Take it," he said. Voice flat, quiet, carrying. "Read it, burn it, file it, but don't let them erase it." The marshal didn't speak. He reached out, took the ledger, felt its weight, nodded once, sharp, clear. He placed it across his saddle horn. Leather creaked, pages settled. He didn't open it. Not yet. He just held it, let it rest, let it exist, let it become part of the record, let it become part of the law, let it become part of the truth that would outlive the valley's dust. Elias turned, walked away toward the ridge, toward the Apache line. His boots left clear prints in the settling dust. Each step measured, each breath steady, each heartbeat slow. The townsmen parted, rifles lowered, barrels pointed at the ground. Hands rested on thighs, eyes watched. No words, no curses. No threats, just silence, just the weight of a choice made, just the quiet realization that violence had been offered and refused, that power had been held and released, that the narrative had shifted, not with blood, with restraint, not with a bullet aimed at flesh, with a bullet aimed at the sky. A signal, a boundary, a line drawn not in law, in honor. The sheriff stayed rooted, hands still on his holster, jaw tight, eyes tracking the rancher's back. He didn't call out, he didn't command, he just stood, let the dust settle, let the smoke clear, let the moment pass. He had expected a fight, he had expected a corpse, he had expected the valley to burn, he had not expected the man to walk away, he had not expected the gun to fire upward. He had not expected the truth to be handed to a neutral coat instead of a warrant. He stood in the space between what he knew and what he was witnessing, and for the first time in years he felt the ground shift beneath him, not with violence, with consequence. Elias reached the base of the ridge, stopped, looked up. The war leader stood 10 feet above. Silhouetted against the deepening twilight, cloak heavy, rifle slung, hands empty, eyes steady, he didn't speak, he didn't gesture. He just stepped down, slow, deliberate, boots silent on stone. He stopped 3 feet away, looked at Elias, looked at his empty hands, looked at his face, looked at the dust on his boots, looked at the sky, then he nodded, once. Sharp, final, a recognition, a weighing, a passing of ground, not alliance, not friendship, respect, hard-won, fragile, real. Earned through fire, through silence, through the refusal to feed it. Elias didn't smile, he didn't sigh, he just stood, present, unbroken, ready. He felt the iron token in his pocket, felt the empty holster, felt the cold earth through his boots, felt the quiet pulse of the basin, felt the weight of the choice. It wasn't victory, it wasn't defeat, it was balance. It was the space between law and justice, between fear and mercy, between vengeance and principle. He had stepped into it, he had stood in it. He had refused to burn it down, he had chosen to hold it, to carry it, to let it settle, let it breathe, let it take root. The wind returned, slow, cool, carrying the scent of pine, of dry sage, of cooling stone. It moved across the basin, stirred the dust, thinned the smoke. Lifted the first stars into clearer view. The townsmen began to shift. Saddles creaked, reins tightened, horses snorted. They didn't turn, not yet. They watched, waited, measured. The marshal closed his eyes, breathed out, slow, measured. He opened them, looked at the ledger, looked at the ridge, looked at the sheriff. He didn't speak, he just adjusted his grip on the saddle horn. Let the weight settle, let the truth rest, let the record hold. The sheriff finally moved, hands slipped from his holster, fingers uncurled, shoulders dropped just slightly, just enough to signal the end of the standoff, not surrender, not defeat, acceptance of the ground, of the choice, of the man who had stood in it. He turned, walked back to his horse, mounted, adjusted his hat, looked out over the basin, looked at the ridge. Looked at the sky. He didn't give orders, he didn't speak. He just pulled the reins, turned the horse, began to ride out, slow, deliberate, leaving the dust behind, leaving the smoke, leaving the ledger, leaving the line he had crossed. The townsmen followed, one by one, saddles shifting. Hoofbeats echoing, rifles resting, ropes coiling. They didn't look back, they didn't need to. The story had changed, the ground had shifted, the fire had been refused. The valley would remember, not in blood, in silence, in restraint, in the quiet weight of a bullet fired at the sky. Elias didn't watch them leave. He kept his eyes forward, kept his stance steady, kept his breathing even. He felt the cool air against his face, felt the dust settling around his boots, felt the quiet pulse of the earth, felt the presence of the men on the ridge, felt the absence of violence. It wasn't peace, not yet. It was the space before it. The ground cleared, the line held, the burden carried, the choice made. He had walked into the fire, he had stood in it, he had refused to burn, he had chosen to hold. To protect, to step away from the trigger, to aim at the sky, to let the truth speak without blood, to let mercy outweigh vengeance, to let honor outlive fear. The war leader turned slightly, looked east, looked west, raised a hand, fingers spread, then closed. A signal. Warriors shifted, bows slung, rifles rested, posts held. The ridge didn't empty, it settled. It became part of the ground, part of the line, part of the boundary. Elias felt it, in the air, in the soil, in the quiet. He didn't move, he just stood. Let the twilight deepen, let the stars brighten, let the wind carry the dust, let the basin breathe, let the moment rest, let the consequence settle, let the truth take root. He thought of the girl, miles away, safe, breathing, waking, healing. He thought of the ledger, resting on a grey saddle, waiting to be read, waiting to be filed, waiting to outlive the men who forged it, waiting to outlive the men who buried it, waiting to speak when the law finally listened. He thought of the silver casing, lying in the dust, small, bright, final, a promise kept, a line drawn, a choice made, not for revenge, not for glory, not for survival, for justice, for mercy, for the quiet, heavy truth that some battles are won by refusing to fight, by standing still, by holding the ground, by letting the sky take the bullet, by letting the earth take the weight, by letting the valley breathe. He didn't smile, he didn't sigh, he just stood, present, unbroken, ready for whatever came next. However it ended, he had walked into the fire, he had stood in it. He had chosen not to burn. He had chosen to hold, to carry, to protect, to step into the line, to let the truth stand, to let mercy outweigh vengeance, to let honor outlive fear. The basin held its breath, the wind settled, the stars brightened, the dust rested, the ground shifted, not with violence, with consequence, with the quiet, heavy weight of a man who had finally chosen to stand. And in that choice the valley found its first true peace, not in law, in restraint, not in rope, in release, not in blood, in breath. And Elia's thorn stood in it, still, steady, unbroken, holding the line. Whatever came next, however it ended, he would face it, not with vengeance, not with fear, with the quiet, heavy truth of a man who had finally chosen to stand. The rain came slow at first. A single drop struck the corrugated tin roof, then another, then a steady, rhythmic patter that swallowed the dry silence of months. Dust rose in faint sighs before the water pressed it down into dark, heavy soil. The scent of wet sage and cracked earth filled the valley. It was a sound Elias hadn't heard in over a year, not the sharp crack of thunder that promised only lightning and fire, but the low, continuous hum of water soaking into parched ground. He stood on the porch, boots planted on warped pine, hands resting on the damp railing. He didn't move, he just listened. Let the rain wash over the fence line, let it darken the cottonwood leaves, let it fill the shallow ruts where wagon wheels had carved deep grooves during the dry season. The land remembered violence. It remembered hoof prints and boot prints and the heavy drag of rope across hard dirt. Now it remembered water. Now it remembered breath. Months had passed since the standoff in the basin, since the silver casing fell into the dust, since the ledger changed hands, since the law shifted on its axis and the valley learned to live in the space between what was written and what was right. Elias hadn't counted the days. He didn't need to. The seasons marked time now. The frost that cracked along the irrigation ditches, the pale green shoots pushing through the mud, the way the wind carried less ash and more damp soil. The drought had broken, not with a storm, not with a flood, but with patience. The kind of patience he had forced himself to learn when he lowered the revolver and aimed it at the sky. The kind of patience that doesn't demand surrender, it demands endurance. He stepped down from the porch. Mud clung to his boots, heavy, real. He walked toward the south fence line where the wire had snapped under the weight of a dead branch. His hands worked without thought, pliers in one grip, twisted metal in the other. He pulled the wire taut, fed it through the wooden post, twisted it tight. The motion was familiar, repetitive, grounding. Every pull of the pliers echoed the rhythm of the rain. Every snap of the wire settled a fraction of the tension that had lived in his shoulders for years. He didn't rush. He didn't look up when hoofbeats sounded in the distance. He just kept working, let the sound approach, let it pass, let it fade into the wet grass. 3 riders crested the eastern ridge, cloaks heavy with moisture, horses moving at a steady, unhurried pace. They didn't fan out, they didn't scout. They just followed the trail that ran parallel to his property line. The lead rider lifted a hand, 2 fingers pressed together against the brim of a wide hat. A gesture, not a challenge, not a greeting, an acknowledgement. Elias didn't stop twisting the wire. He raised his own hand, held it steady, let the rain wash over his knuckles, let the mud settle around his boots. The riders didn't slow, they didn't pause, they just passed. The sound of their horses' hooves softened as they moved onto wet soil. The wind carried the faint scent of cured leather and damp wool. Then they were gone, just silhouettes fading into the sage and mist. No debt claimed, no threat held, just ground shared, just a line respected, just the quiet understanding that peace isn't signed on paper. It's lived in the space between 2 people who choose not to draw. He finished the wire, tested it, tight, secure. He wiped his hands on a rag, folded the pliers, tucked them into his coat pocket. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. The sky opened slightly, pale light filtered through the clouds. He walked back toward the barn. His steps left deep impressions in the mud. Each one filled slowly with water, each one held. He didn't look for signs of trouble. He didn't scan the ridges for dust plumes. He just walked. Let the quiet settle into his ribs. Let the weight of the months press down and then lift. Solitude wasn't a punishment anymore. It was a consequence he had chosen. It was the price of a bullet fired upward, of a ledger handed to a neutral coat, of a line held when every other man would have broken it. He carried it. He didn't resent it. He just lived in it. Near the fence gate he saw the first sack. Burlap, heavy, slightly damp at the bottom. Winter wheat, tied with rough twine. Left just inside the wooden post where the trail met his property. No note, no mark, just grain. He stopped, looked at it, knew where it came from, knew who had left it. Sealers from the general store, or maybe Harlan or Corrigan, it didn't matter. The hands that carried it were the same hands that had watched him stand in the basin, the same hands that had gripped rifles, the same hands that had waited for the smoke to clear and realized the valley wouldn't burn. They didn't stay to talk. They didn't meet his eyes. They just rode past after leaving it, shoulders tight, heads down, shame and respect tangled in the same breath. He hadn't asked for it. He wouldn't return it. He just picked it up, felt the weight, carried it to the barn. Set it against the dry wall, let it rest. Another sack appeared 2 days later, barley, left by the hitching post. A third followed by week's end, oats. He stopped counting after that. He didn't track who left them. He didn't wonder why. He just stacked them, used them when the spring planting began. Fed them to the draft horses when the plow turned the wet earth. The town didn't invite him back. They didn't send word of reconciliation. They just left seed at his fence line and rode away. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement, a quiet admission that the line he had drawn wasn't weakness. It was weight, and the valley was learning to carry it. Further down the trail, the sound of heavy wheels broke the damp air, federal wagons. Canvas covers pulled tight against the mist, axles groaning over mud. 6 men in dark coats, ledgers strapped to the seats, pens in pockets, eyes that measured rather than judged. They moved through the territory like a slow tide, auditing deeds, cross-referencing stamps. verifying boundaries that had been erased, altered, and forged in back rooms where whiskey drowned conscience. The sheriff's office had gone quiet. The warrant book sat closed. The deputies who had ridden with him that day now rode with different men, different orders, different silence. The law didn't bend all at once. It fractured slowly, uneasily, like dry wood splitting under steady pressure. The ledger had done its work. It didn't need to be read aloud in a courtroom. It just needed to exist. To sit on a desk, to be copied, to be filed, to become part of the record that outlives the men who try to burn it. Elias watched the wagons from the porch. He didn't wave. He didn't step down. He just sat on the top step, boots resting on the damp wood, hands folded over his knees. The rain had stopped. The clouds parted. Pale sunlight broke through. It caught the wet leaves, made them shine, made the mud look like dark glass. He thought of the girl. He didn't know where she was, didn't know if she had found her people, didn't know if she carried the same quiet weight he did. He didn't need to know. Her survival was enough. The ledger was enough. The valley breathing was enough. He had buried his brother in hard dirt. He had carried the rope marks in his memory for years. He had sworn he wouldn't feed the fire. He hadn't. He had stood in it. He had let it burn out on its own. The cost wasn't land. It wasn't rope. It was isolation. It was the silence of a porch where no visitors lingered. It was the weight of a choice that wouldn't be celebrated, only endured. He accepted it. He wouldn't trade it. It was the price of a clear sky. The days settled into a rhythm. Mornings brought dew on the fence wire. Afternoons brought sun on the plowed fields. Evenings brought the low call of distant birds and the soft creak of barn wood settling. Elias worked. He mended. He planted. He watched the earth take the seed. He watched the rain soak it in. He didn't rush the seasons. He didn't force the harvest. He just tended what was in front of him. Let the past rest where it belonged, in the dirt, in the wood, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. The rifle stayed by the door, unloaded, dust gathering on the barrel, not as a threat, as a marker, a reminder that some weapons are most powerful when they're never used, that some bullets are meant to speak to the sky instead of the chest, that some lines are held not by force, by restraint. One afternoon the wind shifted, carried the scent of wood smoke from the ridge, not campfire smoke, signal smoke, thin, gray, rising in a steady column. He paused, wiped sweat from his brow, looked up. The column held, didn't drift, didn't scatter, just rose. He didn't reach for iron, he didn't tense, he just watched. Let the smoke paint the sky. Let it mark the distance. Let it remind him that the ground was still shared, that the tribe still moved through it, that the boundary wasn't a wall, it was a line of respect, drawn in mud and memory, held in silence. He returned to the well, dropped the bucket, listened to the water splash against metal, pulled it up, cold. Clear, real, he drank, let the water wash the dust from his throat, let it settle in his chest, let it remind him that survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the next breath, the next step, the next day. The town's influence fractured quietly. No speeches, no trials, no public hangings to satisfy the old hunger for spectacle, just ledgers copied, just deeds revised, just warrants expired. Just men who had worn badges finding their pockets empty and their names crossed off registers. The law shifted on its own, slowly, uneasily, like a river finding a new channel after a dam breaks. The federal auditors packed their wagons, rolled out toward the territorial capital, left behind a valley that breathed easier, not free, not perfect. Just unburdened by the weight of a single man's greed. The sheriff didn't return, he didn't send word. He just faded into the dust like so many others who thought fear could hold ground. It couldn't. Ground is held by patience, by restraint, by the quiet decision to fire upward instead of forward, to hand truth to a neutral coat instead of hoarding it in a locked drawer, to stand in the basin and let the silence speak louder than the trigger. Elias didn't seek validation. He didn't wait for it, he just worked. Let the seasons turn, let the earth heal, let the valley find its rhythm. He mended the roof, patched the well house, oiled the hinges. He didn't rush, he didn't linger. He just moved through the days like a man who had finally found his place in them, not as a hero, not as an outlaw. Just as a man who had chosen honor over safety, who had chosen mercy over vengeance, who had chosen to carry the weight of a single bullet's purpose until it found its true mark. The sky, the truth, the line, he didn't regret it, he wouldn't change it, he just lived in the aftermath, let it settle, let it breathe, let it become part of the soil. Weeks passed, the wheat sprouted, pale green shoots pushed through the damp earth, they bent in the wind, they didn't break, they just swayed. Like men who had learned to stand in the storm without fighting it, Elias walked the rows, boots sinking slightly in the mud, hands brushing the tips of the leaves. He felt the life in them, the quiet pulse of something taking root, something growing in the space where violence had been refused. Something earned through restraint. He didn't smile, he didn't sigh, he just walked. Let the sun warm his shoulders, let the wind cool his face, let the valley speak in the language of grass and water and quiet earth. It was enough, it had to be. It was the only language that mattered when the guns were silent, when the ledgers were filed, when the rope was coiled and put away, when the men who had waited for a fight finally learned to wait for the rain. He returned to the house as the sun dipped toward the ridge, painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and pale gold. The porch steps creaked under his weight. The door swung open on quiet hinges. He stepped inside, let the door close, let the evening settle around him. The air was still, cool. Carrying the faint scent of dried herbs and old wood, he walked to the windowsill, stopped, looked down. Two objects rested there, catching the last sliver of daylight. One was a spent silver casing, dull at the edges, tarnished by time and handling, marked by the hammer strike that had driven it into the sky. The other was a carved Apache bead, dark wood, polished smooth by touch and rain and years of quiet carrying, shaped like a broken arrow, bound with thin leather cord, placed there not as a trophy, not as a reminder of debt, but as a marker of balance, of ground shared, of a line held. He didn't pick them up, he didn't need to, he just watched the light move across them, saw the silver catch the gold, saw the wood absorb the shadow. Two worlds, resting side by side, not merged. Not erased, just present, just quiet, just true. He stood there for a long time, let the silence settle into his bones, let the weight of the months press down and then lift, let the valley breathe outside the glass, let the rain settle in the fields, let the seed take root, let the law shift slowly, let the town leave sacks at the fence, let the riders pass without hostility, let the past rest in the dirt, let the future grow in the space between breaths. He had chosen, he had stood. He had fired at the sky, he had handed the truth to a neutral coat, he had walked into the line, he had refused to burn it down, he had held it, to protect, to carry, to let it settle, to let it take root. The light faded, the room dimmed, the casing and the bead sank into shadow. He didn't strike a match. He didn't light a lamp, he just turned away, walked to the kitchen, poured water into a tin cup, drank, set the cup down, listened to the wind move through the eaves, listened to the quiet pulse of the valley. Listen to the sound of a world learning to breathe again, not because the law had changed, not because the town had apologized, not because the tribe had declared peace, but because a man had chosen restraint, because a bullet had been fired upward, because a ledger had been handed over, because a line had been held, because some truths don't need to be shouted, they just need to be carried until the ground softens, until the rain falls, until the seed takes root, until the valley remembers that honor isn't loud, it's quiet, it's steady. It's the weight of a choice that outlives the trigger. He stood by the window one last time, looked out at the darkening ridge, looked out at the wet fields, looked out at the trail where riders had passed and men had left seed and wagons had rolled and law had shifted. He didn't speak, he didn't move, he just watched. Let the night settle, let the stars appear, let the quiet stretch, let the consequence breathe, let the legacy hold. It wasn't a victory, it wasn't a triumph, it was a balance. Earned through fire, through silence, through the refusal to feed the flame, through the decision to aim at the sky instead of the chest, through the quiet, heavy truth that some battles are won by standing still, by holding the ground, by letting the earth take the weight, by letting mercy outweigh fear, by letting honor outlive violence. He had walked into it, he had stood in it, he had chosen not to burn, he had chosen to hold, to carry, to protect, to step into the line, to let the truth stand, to let the valley breathe. The wind died, the house settled, the rain stopped, the land rested, the silver casing and the carved beads sat on the windowsill, catching the first pale light of dawn, marking a peace earned through restraint rather than bloodshed. And Elia's thorns stood in it, still, steady, unbroken, holding the line, whatever came next, however it ended. He had faced it, not with vengeance, not with fear, with the quiet, heavy truth of a man who had finally chosen to stand. And in that choice, the valley found its first true peace, not in law. In restraint, not in rope, in release, not in blood, in breath, and the earth remembered it, long after the dust settled, long after the men faded, long after the trigger rusted shut. It remembered the bullet that flew upward, it remembered the ledger that stayed open, it remembered the line that was held, it remembered the quiet, it remembered the rain, it remembered the choice, and it grew from it. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again. Hit subscribe and help this old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matter. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past and your heart pointed west.